What if the man you saved in a dark alley turned out to be the very billionaire trying to destroy your home? And what if he fell in love with you before you even knew his name? This story will make you believe in fate, heartbreak, and second chances. The rain came down like it had something to prove. Streets in District 11 became rivers, and neon signs above closed stalls flickered like fading hopes. Emily Carter tugged her worn raincoat tighter around her small frame as she moved through the night. In one hand she balanced a bamboo basket filled with freshly steamed pork buns, and in the other a tattered umbrella that had long lost its fight against the wind. Her feet, clad in rubber sandals, were soaked. She'd been out since morning, walking street to street, calling out her humble offerings. Tonight was her final push to earn enough to pay the month's rent. Every coin mattered. She passed shuttered food stalls, vacant street corners, and small families huddling beneath tarp roofs. This was her neighborhood. It was poor, forgotten by most, but it was home. Just ahead, something out of place caught her eye. A black luxury car sat awkwardly parked across an alley entrance, headlights cutting through the downpour. A man stood beside it, visibly uncomfortable, staring at his phone. He looked like he belonged in a glossy magazine, not in this district. Emily slowed instinctively. That kind of man didn't walk here. Before she could wonder more, the sound of a scuffle broke through the rain. She turned just in time to see a shadow slam into the man, forcing him against the wall. A mugger. Her heart leapt. Without thinking, she dropped her basket, gripped the umbrella, and dashed across the street. "Oh, hey!" she screamed, charging in. Her umbrella cracked on impact as she slammed it into the attacker's back. The man turned, startled, cursed, and shoved both of them aside before disappearing into the dark. Emily stumbled and fell to her knees, soaked and shivering. The suited stranger was crouched nearby, clutching his side. She crawled to him. "Are you okay? Did he have a knife?" she asked. He shook his head. Breathless, just bruised, he managed. His voice, though hoarse, carried a refined timbre. His eyes, even in the dim light, were arresting. She helped him up, surprised by the strength hidden in her small frame. Rain poured from his expensive coat as she guided him toward the only open shelter nearby, a tiny coffee shop with yellowed windows and a flickering sign, "Open late." Inside, the warmth felt surreal. Emily guided him to a booth and ordered hot tea with her last bit of cash. She sat across from him, watching as steam rose from the ceramic mug. He cradled it without drinking. "You shouldn't walk around here looking like that," she said. "People notice." He gave her a crooked smile. "I'll remember that." She noticed a cut on his chin and offered him a napkin. They said little more. When he asked to borrow her phone to call a driver, she handed it over without hesitation. Outside, she ran back to retrieve her basket, now half soaked and scattered, but salvageable. When she returned to the booth, the man was gone. In his place was her broken umbrella, neatly folded. Beneath it sat a clean envelope. Inside, a note read, "Thank you for the umbrella, the tea, and the courage. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer to thank you in person." Folded within was a single 500,000 D note. Her breath caught. Who was he? No ordinary businessman carried himself that way, but she had no answers, just initials. She didn't know that DTH Holdings stood for Dominic Theo Hawthorne, CEO of DTH Holdings. The man she saved that night was the one planning to bulldoze her neighborhood to build luxury apartments. And he had just met the only person who could make him question everything. Emily Carter returned to her small, crumbling apartment with a soaked basket and a folded umbrella she hadn't owned an hour ago. The envelope sat untouched in her pocket, the crisp note and elegant handwriting still lingering in her mind. She set it aside and poured herself a cup of boiled tap water, sitting cross-legged on the thin mattress in her one-room flat. All night, she couldn't sleep. Who was that man? She had met all kinds: drunks, debt collectors, loan sharks. but none of them had eyes like his, and certainly none wrote thank you notes like poetry. She finally drifted to sleep at dawn, the sound of traffic below buzzing like a distant lullaby. The next week went on like usual. Rain, long shifts at the noodle shop, tired feet, burned fingers, and endless orders shouted from behind the counter. Emily tried not to think about him. She returned the note to the envelope and hid it inside a book she'd bought from a second-hand stall months ago. Wuthering Heights. She wasn't the type to daydream about rich strangers, but sometimes, just before closing her eyes, she'd hear his voice again, low and warm, just bruised. It made her wonder where he was now. What she didn't know was that Dominic Theo Hawthorne couldn't stop thinking about her either. Back in his penthouse suite overlooking the skyline, his assistants came and went like wind currents. Meetings, deals, papers, and contracts. But Dominic found himself staring at a broken umbrella on his desk. The same one she'd swung like a sword. The night hadn't just left a bruise on his side, it had left something unshakable inside him. She hadn't asked for anything. Not a photo, not a name. She didn't even look impressed. It had been years since anyone had treated him like a person. He looked down at the plans for a new luxury development and frowned. District 11 was slated for demolition in less than a month. Dominic ordered his assistant Rachel to bring him all the documents regarding the District 11 redevelopment. She raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. When he studied the files that night, something in his chest tightened. Hundreds of families, low-income housing, eviction notices, names scribbled across lines like they didn't belong. One of them caught his eye. Emily Carter. Apartment 3B. Her name, her building. Without thinking, he circled it. Rachel noticed the shift. "Is something wrong, sir?" she asked. Dominic didn't answer. All he said was, "I need to make a visit." Emily was sweeping the shop floor late Thursday evening when the bell chimed. She looked up, expecting another late customer, but there he was. Wearing a gray coat this time, no longer soaked in rain, but somehow still the same man. Her breath hitched. "You," she said, blinking. He smiled, just barely. "I owed you a better thank you." Emily stood frozen, broom in hand, unsure whether to feel flattered or furious. "You didn't even leave a name." He stepped forward, offering his hand. "Dominic," he said simply. "Dominic Hawthorne." And that moment, everything began to change. Emily didn't take his hand immediately. She stared at it like it was a trick, a trap, a dream she was too tired to question. Dominic Hawthorne. She'd heard the name before. It echoed in news reports, glimmered in glossy real estate ads, and was whispered with a kind of awe that didn't belong in her world. But the man in front of her didn't have a bodyguard. He didn't wear arrogance like a crown. He just stood there. Wait. She finally took his hand. "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." His grip was warm, firm, respectful. "I remember," he replied, and there was something almost boyish in his smile. Like gratitude had softened the lines wealth had carved into his face. The noodle shop was empty, and the smell of broth clung to the air. She pulled away, suddenly self-conscious. "Why are you here?" Dominic sat on one of the stools, his coat dripping faintly onto the tile. "To see you," he said. Emily laughed, dry and tired. "Rich men don't come to this district to chat." He didn't argue. "You helped me when you didn't have to. I wanted to repay that." She crossed her arms. "You already did. That envelope paid my electricity for 2 weeks." He looked surprised. "It wasn't meant to be charity." "It was," she said plainly. "But thank you anyway." A silence settled between them, not awkward, just honest. Then she added, "So, what now? You going to buy me dinner?" To her surprise, he said, "Yes." They ended up at a late-night diner a few blocks away where the fluorescent lights buzzed and the laminated menus hadn't changed in years. Emily ordered noodles and dumplings. Dominic asked for the same. "So, what do you do?" she asked, knowing full well what the answer was. He paused for a moment, then said, "Property development. I run a company that works on buildings, renovations, investments." She narrowed her eyes. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. But it wasn't the truth either. "Sounds like a lot of meetings," she said. He smiled. "It is. And paperwork. Endless paperwork." "And umbrellas," she added, deadpan. That made him laugh, really laugh, and Emily found herself startled by how young he looked when he did. As they ate, she asked questions. Not out of flattery, but curiosity. He noticed how she looked at people passing by, how she folded her napkin, how she shared half her dumplings with the stray cat that always lingered outside the diner's door. Dominic answered politely, but asked more than he told. "What do you really want to do?" he asked. She blinked. "You mean, if I weren't broke?" "Yes." She hesitated, then said, "Study psychology. Help people. Not the rich ones, the ones no one talks to." He didn't laugh. He just nodded. "I think you already do." It was said so quietly, so earnestly, she almost missed it. They walked back under a gentler rain. Not the kind that soaks through bone, but the kind that cools your skin and makes the streetlights look like stars. Outside her building, she hesitated. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you," he replied. He didn't ask to come up. He didn't reach for her hand. He just looked at her like he was memorizing her face. "Good night, Emily. Good night." When she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, her heart full of questions. Outside, Dominic stood for a moment longer, eyes on the cracked windows of a building his company already owned. The next morning, Dominic stared at the development plans for District 11, his coffee untouched. The blueprints showed rows of luxury condos, glass towers that would scrape the sky, and green courtyards that looked beautiful on paper. But the small buildings marked in red, the ones scheduled for demolition, included hers. Emily's building. Apartment 3B. He remembered the chipped paint on her door, the mail slot barely hanging on, the smell of fried garlic and books and rain. Rachel, his assistant, entered with a tablet in hand. "Board meeting at 10, she reminded him. He nodded, but didn't move. "Push it an hour," he said. "I need to visit a site." Emily, meanwhile, was back at the noodle shop by 8. Her manager was grumpy, her apron still smelled like onions, and her wrist ached from carrying soup pots. But something in her felt lighter. Last night had been strange, surreal, but kind. She didn't know if she would ever see Dominic again, and part of her didn't want to. Men like him didn't belong in her story. Not really. But before she could push the thought away, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She picked it up hesitantly. "Emily?" His voice made her freeze. "Dominic?" she whispered. "Are you okay?" He laughed. "Yes, I was just wondering if you'd like to come see something." An hour later, she found herself standing in the middle of a nearly empty warehouse, sunlight streaming through cracked windows. Dominic was there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "This used to be a textile mill," he said. "Now it's abandoned." She glanced around. "You brought me here to show me a ruin?" He chuckled. "I brought you here to ask a question." He looked nervous. "If this space became a community center, with free tutoring, mental health support, workshops, would people around here use it?" Emily blinked. "You want to build that?" He shrugged. "Only if it matters." For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly, "It would change everything." That afternoon they walked through her neighborhood. Dominic took photos of buildings, asked questions about residents, and even helped an old woman carry groceries up the stairs. Emily watched him, puzzled. He didn't act like the men in suits who came once a year with clipboards. He listened. He remembered names. At one point, a teenager approached, scowling. "You're one of those developers, aren't you? My uncle's losing his shop because of your people." Dominic didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," he said honestly. "We're trying to change that." The boy didn't believe him, but Emily saw the truth, and it terrified her, because she was beginning to believe it too. That night, Dominic stood once more outside Emily's building. She invited him in for tea, just tea, and they sat on the floor, legs crossed, sharing stories like old friends. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" she asked at last. He sighed. "Because I didn't want to be that person when I was with you." She nodded slowly. "And who are you now?" Dominic looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. "Someone trying to deserve the kindness you showed a stranger in the rain." She didn't answer. She poured him another cup instead. Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, two worlds were quietly beginning to merge. Dominic couldn't sleep. The city that usually soothed him now felt like noise. For the first time in years, he was hesitant to walk into a boardroom. His company was known for speed, moving fast, demolishing, building, profiting. But now he questioned every blueprint. Rachel noticed. "You've missed 3 investor calls this week," she said, setting down a folder. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Dominic rubbed his forehead. "Have you ever looked at something and realized you built it on top of someone else's heartbreak?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Are you talking about District 11? He nodded. "And a girl who made me see it all differently." Meanwhile, Emily sat at her tiny desk, staring at her landlord's notice. Her building was scheduled for demolition in 4 weeks. She hadn't told Dominic. She couldn't. It felt like betrayal just to know him while her neighbors packed boxes. But inside she battled questions. Could she trust him? Was he really different? Or was she just one more story he'd walk away from once the project was done? When she went downstairs to throw out the trash, she saw Mrs. Lynn, the woman from upstairs, sitting alone on a bench. "They offered me a buyout," the woman said. "But where do I go with $2,000, 0 cents? That's not even enough for a deposit somewhere decent." Emily sat beside her in silence. She felt like screaming. That evening, Dominic invited Emily to dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at his apartment. When she arrived, she was stunned. The place was beautiful, yes, but more surprising was the shelf full of books, the half-painted canvas on the balcony, and the smell of homemade curry. "You cook?" she asked. "Poorly," he admitted, "but I try." They ate on the floor, sharing stories between bites. He told her about his parents, how they'd died when he was young, how he was raised by an uncle who only believed in numbers. She told him about her mother's bookstore, now long gone, and how she still dreamed of opening a reading center for kids. "You're not who I expected," they both said at the same time, then laughed. After dinner, Emily finally said it. "My building's on your demolition list." Dominic froze. The silence that followed was thick. "I know," he said. "I saw it last week." She blinked. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know how to ask you to forgive me for something I didn't even realize I was doing until it was too late." Emily stood, suddenly overwhelmed. "Dominic, my neighbors are packing. Kids crying, old people scared, and I let you sit here cooking curry like everything's normal." He didn't stop her when she grabbed her coat, but his voice followed her. "I never wanted to be someone who takes. I want to change it. For them. For you." Emily didn't look back. She walked out into the wind, heart pounding. That night, Dominic called an emergency meeting with the board. "We're not touching District 11, he declared. Gasps erupted. "We've already sunk millions," one executive protested. "Then we'll redirect it," Dominic said. "Into restoration, into services, into people. Rachel watched him, stunned. After the meeting, she asked, "Is this about her?" Dominic nodded. "She didn't just save me that night. She made me want to be better." Elsewhere in the city, Emily sat on her rooftop, watching lights flicker across the skyline. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a lie. News of Dominic Hawthorne's abrupt decision spread like wildfire through the industry. By noon the next day, headlines blared. CEO cancels billion-dollar redevelopment. Hawthorne halts project to protect community. Investors panicked. Journalists speculated. Dominic didn't answer calls. He sat alone in his office, staring at a map of District 11, now pinned with red strings and yellow notes, not for demolition but for restoration. Schools, clinics, local businesses. Rachel walked in and set down a coffee. "They're asking if this is a PR stunt," she said. Dominic shook his head. "Let them. I'm not doing this for headlines." He reached for his phone but hesitated. He hadn't heard from Emily since that night. Emily, meanwhile, had thrown herself into helping her neighbors. She met with tenant groups, organized a petition, and tried to contact local officials. When the news finally reached her, when someone showed her the headline on a cracked tablet in the alley, she didn't believe it. Not at first. "Hawthorne?" she repeated. "He's canceling everything?" "That's what it says," the man replied. She felt a strange surge of emotion, disbelief, anger. She had left him. She hadn't believed him. And yet, he'd done exactly what he said he would. She walked the neighborhood that afternoon, feeling eyes on her. "Did you talk to him?" people whispered. "Is he really doing this?" She didn't have answers, only feelings. That evening, Dominic arrived at District 11, not in a suit, not in a luxury car, but in jeans and a hoodie. He knocked on doors, answered questions, listened. When he finally knocked on Emily's, she was sitting at her desk, editing a flyer about free legal aid. She opened the door slowly. "You really did it," she said. He looked tired. "I had to. It was the first thing I'd done that felt like mine." She stepped aside. He entered cautiously. The apartment looked the same, but something in the air had shifted. "They think I convinced you," she said. "Maybe you did," he replied. "Or maybe I just needed someone to make me remember what I believe in." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Emily broke it. "Why did you come back?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "Because you're the only person I've met in years who looked at me and didn't see a bank account." She swallowed hard. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Dominic stood, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a dog-eared copy of Wuthering Heights. Someone who's braver than she knows. Someone who fights for others even when she's breaking inside. He placed the book back and met her eyes. "Someone I'm not ready to walk away from." Emily looked down. "I don't know if I can forgive everything." "I don't expect you to," he said. "I just want the chance to try." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Dominic stood to leave. "Take your time," he said at the door. "I'm not going anywhere." He stepped into the drizzle, leaving footprints across the old stairwell. Emily watched him go, heart pounding. The city felt quieter than usual. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a tenant asking if the eviction notices were really canceled. She typed, "Yes, it's real." Then, after a pause, she added, "He meant what he said." On the street, Dominic looked up at her window just as she appeared behind the curtain. Their eyes met. No promises, just presence. And sometimes that's enough.